Thank you very much, Thomas. We've got a final speaker, Marty Stevens, who was an integral part of the preparation or the production of the November of the 2007 National Academy of Sciences document. Jim Yeager was there as well, and Dan Kruski. I've seen his face around here from time. He was chairman of that group. So we've had some interesting connections. Kat has had some interesting connections with that document. So, Marty, going to hand it over to you, and you'll take us home.
Okay, last but not least, and I'll give a few closing remarks after this presentation, but I'll be brief. So thank you for those of you still in the audience, the die-hard folks here, and maybe still online.
They're paying us to stay.
The true believers. Some of you are just blow-up dolls, I think. My presentation, this presentation is kind of looking back, and it's a nice bookend to this morning's presentation, and the closing remarks will look forward and be a nice bookend to what we've heard this afternoon. So Bill and Rex, I'm deliberately informal here, calling them by their first names, because what I'll be talking about is them as individuals, not as mysterious authors of something that was published decades ago. Their rediscovery and reunion and the republication of principles. Let's see. All righty. Let's use this. Okay, rediscovery. Of course, Rex on the right, Bill on the left. And their rediscovery came up in the context of an awards program that we tried to set up at the Humane Society of the United States around 1990. We needed to come up with a name of the award, and we immediately thought of Russell and Burch, and we were a little puzzled that no one had used that name before for their awards. So we thought we were done. We had our name for our award and could move on and get on with the first one. But the lawyer said, hold on a minute, you have to get permission to use that name. And we were quite puzzled because it was like getting permission to use the name Lewis and Clark or Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. It's like, where do we begin? Are they still alive? Where do they live, etc.? So the journey began, and we had to use old-fashioned methods that some of you may remember. Google wasn't around, email wasn't around. So we called and wrote to a lot of people, and I should say that the people in this room that I contacted were all singularly unhelpful in trying to find Russell and Burch. But finally, somebody said, well, contact UFAW. It's kind of the last known point of contact with them. I was very skeptical because that was decades ago. Major Hume had died, Peter Medawar had died, all those figures that you heard about were long since gone. But lo and behold, they said, yeah, we know where they are, they're alive, and we can contact them for you. I guess they didn't trust me to contact them directly by just giving me their address, so they were the intermediary. And they finally got back to me, and they said, yes, Russell and Burch said yes to the award. I put an asterisk here because we originally wanted to make this a 2R award. In our righteousness, we didn't feel that refinement should be part of it. But to get their permission, we were more than happy to go along with the 3R award. So we were ecstatic. And the very next year bestowed the first Russell and Burch Award to Alan Goldberg. I think he uses it as a door stopper. It's got sufficient weight to it. So rediscovering Russell and Burch was a happy outcome of our naming the award after them. And we thought, well, that was it. You know, we would just have pen pals. We would write to each other from time to time. But in the process of being pen pals, I had discovered that they had not seen each other in decades since the UFAW project. And I thought, well, they're both in England. It's not that big of a country. Let me go there and reunite them, say hello to them. And so UFAW kindly made that happen on the ground. I'm symbolically showing Roger Eubank here driving the car with Bill, his wife Claire, and me as we drove from Reading up to Sheringham, where Rex Burch lived and worked. Rex even then wasn't up for travel. This was July in 1993, so a couple of years after I first realized they were still alive and named the award after them. They were over the moon to have the award named after them. They were over the moon to see each other, to hear all the developments that had happened since 1959, because as you heard this morning, they had moved on from that UFAW project and weren't aware of these things. So that was a blast. That was one of the best days of my life to make that happen. And we had some photos from that visit, but sad to say both UFAW and the Humane Society of the United States, where I was working at the time, both lost the photos. So it turns out that the Sheringham workshop, which was a couple of years later, the reception was in the very same room that Russell and Burch and I and Claire were in a couple of years earlier. So I've made creative use of my Photoshop skills and to recreate the scene as it was in 1993, a couple of years before the Sheringham workshop. So it was just Bill and Rex and me and Claire in that room, and it was a blast. This was Town Hall in Sheringham, and Rex worked in a set of rooms on the first floor of that building. We also had a shot like this. Again, we don't know where the photos are, but we had an obligatory shot in front of the town hall, as you saw in Sheringham. But the photo was, we gave the photo back then to the editor of the Humane Society News to highlight a short piece that we wrote for the news. And she thought the photo was so awful that she couldn't use it, but what she did was she used the heads of the three of us to illustrate the article. And even the heads were kind of, I'm surprised she used them, because we looked so grim and unhappy, despite the happy occasion. Bill was completely disheveled, more so than usual, as you can get a glimpse of there. And I had just flown over from the States and gone directly to this meeting, so I was completely disheveled. But if you do a forensic analysis of these three aspects of the photo, you can figure out that I'm in the middle slot of the three, because you can see the male slot just next to my ear there. So there's the male slot between Bill and Rex, and there's the male slot near my ear, and Bill's to the right of me, because you can see bricks near his ear, and Rex is to the left, because you can see the bricks on his left. At any rate, we had a blast that day, and we'll never forget it. So another unexpected consequence of sort of rediscovering them was the republication of Principles. And we were very flattered in that UFAW, who did the republication, credited the Humane Society of the United States and the Russell and Burch Award for republishing the book. In their foreword, they mentioned the award a few times and refer to the republication also as a long overdue tribute to Bill and Rex. So this was 1992, 1 year after we gave the first Russell and Burch Award and 2 years after we first contacted UFAW to help us contact Bill and Russell. So that was another really nice outcome of setting this ball in motion. And another nice outcome was that in the town hall meeting, Bill and Rex gave me a signed copy of the new edition of the book. So I don't want to overly dramatize these events. They were what they were, but and I don't agree with Michael's distinction of before Marty Stevens and after Marty Stevens. Some of you heard his lecture a few days ago, and that this was a signal event. It was what it was, but think what a shame it would be if we hadn't contacted these pioneers. I mean, what a shame for the two of them not to see each other again. What a shame for those of us who got to know them but wouldn't have gotten to know them if we just ignored them, and Rex would have died a couple of years later, et cetera. And what a shame for the community who wouldn't have been exposed to Bill and Rex, and particularly Bill and his enthusiasm. So I think it was important to rediscover them and bring them into the fold, and Alan deserves a lot of the credit for bringing Bill into the fold shortly after this. So I've done a lot of things in my career, and was involved with the 2007 TT21C report and opening up policy networks and getting Allergan to stop testing Botox on animals with Michael's help, and a lot of other things. But this is probably what I'll be remembered for, even though it was sort of an accident in naming the award. So thank you very much. So I want to look forward now in just a few closing remarks. I have a couple of slides here. But this review of Russell and Burch will help when we email you the test that we're going to give you in the coming weeks. This will be very brief. So this is a very exciting day for me and a moving day to see some of the old friends and new faces and know that things are in good hands with the next generation. So by way of closing remarks, I just want to say a few things about, firstly, the fruits of today's look back. I don't think we have to be obsessive about looking back and doing it too frequently, but I think it is helpful to look back from time to time and see who helped pave the road that you're on. This particular look back provides a sense, in a way, of what one project set in motion, project by UFAW in the 50s set in motion. That's pretty incredible. So we got some insights into the early players, UFAW, Russell and Burch, Medawar, Hume, and others. We saw that at CAD and elsewhere there was a strong foundation built since the Principles was published. And in the afternoon presentations, we got a sense of the convergence between replacement methods and 21st century methods, certainly in toxicology and perhaps elsewhere. So that I see the glass as very much half full, if not more than half full, and there's no reason to think that the pace of progress won't speed up from here. It's interesting just to think about how to evaluate the true impact of the Principles. Were subsequent developments truly contingent upon that book and that project, or were some of them inevitable? I mean, it's a hard question to answer, right? Sometimes historians, John and I were talking about this, do a kind of counterfactual historical account, kind of a thought experiment. Well, what if this didn't happen? And just thinking for a few minutes about, well, what if the Principles hadn't happened, that project hadn't happened? I don't think there'd be any unifying 3 Rs type theme. It wasn't inevitable that these things were put together. We might have more siloed efforts and consequently no larger overarching 3Rs community, no sense of common purpose. I perhaps wouldn't know Bert Van Zupfen, David Morton, and others who work in the refinement sphere, whereas I work mostly in other spheres. So there's that sense of community. Perhaps there wouldn't be the resulting cross-fertilization. And of course, there might not have been a Bill Russell-like character to inspire us all. So it would be good for some historian to do this kind of counterfactual thought experiment and write a compelling narrative, even though we can't know for sure what would have happened. So what now? I just want to say a few words about an article that I wrote with a couple of colleagues, including Catherine Herman, who you heard earlier, and Francesca Pistolato from ECFAM. So what we'd like to see, and I think what many of you would like to see, is an international strategy, or perhaps a series of interlocking strategies that cover the waterfront on these issues and that make some sense and not have everybody just doing their own thing. I think the vision should be, as Rusty mentioned, at least with respect to animal testing, if not the whole sphere of animal experimentation, full replacement, the complete replacement of animals in experimentation. With the timeline, you know, President Kennedy didn't say, I'd like to put a man on the moon someday in the distant future. We don't know the time. That would have gone over very poorly. So a deadline, a timeline, with an emphasis on replacement alternatives. I think given the power of the alternative methods that we've seen, the organ on a chip, the computational methods, organoids, et cetera, that it's time to concentrate on replacement methods or animal-free methods, time to concentrate on human relevance. Let's stop trying to model animal results. And let's focus heavily on biomedical research, where most of the animals are being used. It was probably a good idea to start with animal testing, but I think it's time, as Kat is doing and others are doing, to move into the biomedical experimentation arena with some gusto. We have some forerunners of the kind of overarching strategy that I'm talking about. Certainly the roadmaps that we've seen by various U.S. regulatory agencies and that we've heard from Nicole and others, those have been fantastic. There's an effort in the Netherlands that Bert could tell us much more about, that I think the focus is animals in science, not just animals in testing. There's a vision behind the current EU legislation for complete replacement. I think that's encouraging. And we saw the quote from Russell and Burch, refinement and reduction are never enough. We have to work towards replacement. They themselves didn't talk about complete replacement. I think that would have been political suicide for them, even if they had that thought. But we can dream big like that. I put this rad, I guess, in here just because the early talks this morning, there was no picture of an animal, but subsequent talks in the afternoon have had plenty of pictures of animals. This is my last slide, perhaps a little provocatively. I think we need to remember that the 3 Rs have animals as their reference point. We need to remember that UFAW's mission, to quote, was to reduce the sum total of pain and fear inflicted on animals by man. We certainly should welcome the efforts of people who are motivated by something other than animal welfare, and those other motivations can include people who are just into methodological innovation, or biomedical progress, or commercial opportunities here and there. But I think the time has passed where we need to be uncomfortable about promoting animal welfare with this good science. Let's not be ashamed of our heritage. Andrew touched on this in the board meeting yesterday that some of you were at. Animal welfare is one of the legs that this stool stands on, and we've had a whole revolution in animal protection since Russell and Burch first came on the scene, and that should embolden us. Thank you very much. So perhaps Thomas wants to, Andrew has deputized me to say something in closing, but I think maybe Thomas.
I think everything is said. I think it was a wonderful event. I'm so grateful that we were able to host this. Thank you very much for everybody who contributed in whatever way, and if it was only by applauding and enjoying the day. Safe travel, enjoy the weekend, and I hope to see you at another CUT event.